Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Cursed. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 true scary and creepy trucker stories from the deep Appalachian Mountains. These are scary things that happen to truck drivers on dark mountain roads. Stories that are so creepy, even the toughest drivers get scared talking about them. But before we begin, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're listening from. Thank you all for your support. It means a lot to me. Now, let's start. I'm 61 years old, and I spent the better part of my life underground pulling coal out of West Virginia mountains. When the mines shut down in 2001, I figured my working days were behind me, but bills don't pay themselves. So I got my CDL and started hauling freight. Spent 15 years driving every back road and interstate from here to Florida. This story's about my last run, the one that was supposed to set me up for retirement. Instead, it changed everything I thought I knew about what's out there in the dark. The year was 2016, and I'd just landed a sweet contract hauling lumber from a mill outside Charleston down to Norfolk, Virginia. Good money, familiar route, and my wife Sarah had already picked out the travel trailer we were going to buy with my final paycheck. I'd driven that stretch of highway dozens of times, mostly daylight runs, but this load got delayed at the mill, and they needed it there by morning. So I headed out around 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October, figuring I'd make good time on empty roads and be home by Thursday afternoon, officially retired. The first couple hours went smooth as silk. My Peterbilt was humming along, CB radio crackling with the usual chatter from other drivers, GPS showing clear sailing all the way to Norfolk. I'd driven through these mountains so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. Knew every truck stop, every way station, every steep grade where you had to gear down. The moon was about half full that night, casting just enough light to see the ridgelines rolling past like sleeping giants. It was right around midnight when things started getting strange. I was coming up on a section of highway I'd traveled maybe 100 times before, a long, winding stretch through some real remote country where you might not see another soul for 20 miles. The road dips down into a valley, then climbs back up through thick forest on both sides. Nothing but trees and darkness for miles in any direction. That's when I saw the lights ahead. At first, I thought it was just another truck convoy. Happens all the time, especially on freight runs. But as I got closer, something felt off. There were 5 trucks moving in perfect formation, blocking both lanes of the highway. All identical black Peterbilts, not a single marking or company logo on any of them. They were maintaining the exact same distance from each other, moving at maybe 45 miles per hour, which is unusual for that stretch where most drivers push 65 or 70. I tried to pass them on the left, but every time I pulled out, the lead truck would drift over just enough to block me. Same thing happened when I tried the right shoulder. It was like they knew exactly what I was thinking before I did it. Now, I've been around truckers my whole life, and we've got our share of idiots and road ragers. But this was different. This felt coordinated, deliberate. The strangest part was their headlights. I was close enough behind them to see everything clearly, but those 5 trucks weren't casting any light ahead of them. No beams on the road, no reflection off the guardrails. Nothing. It was like they were absorbing every bit of light that touched them. Driving behind those trucks felt like following 5 holes cut right out of the night sky. After about an hour of this, I started getting genuinely worried. The road we were on should have curved back toward the main highway by now, but we just kept winding deeper into mountains I didn't recognize. My GPS screen had gone fuzzy about 20 minutes back, showing nothing but static where the map should be. The CB radio was picking up nothing but white noise. That's when I started seeing the road signs. First one I noticed was a green highway sign, the kind that shows mileage to upcoming towns. But instead of familiar names like Beckley or Lewisburg, it was covered in symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Not any language I'd ever seen. These symbols seemed to shift and crawl when I wasn't focusing on them. Made my head throb just trying to make sense of what I was seeing. More signs started appearing every few miles, all covered in the same writhing symbols. My truck's headlights would hit them, and for just a second, I could swear the symbols were moving, rearranging themselves into different patterns. I tried looking away, focusing on the road ahead, but those images burned themselves into my vision. The convoy led me deeper into a valley that shouldn't have existed. I'd been driving these mountains for over a decade, knew every ridge and hollow, but this place was completely foreign. The valley walls rose up on both sides, higher and steeper than anything I'd ever seen in West Virginia. It was like driving into the bottom of the Grand Canyon, except this valley couldn't have been more than a mile wide. And at the bottom of that impossible valley was a town. The lights hit me first, street lamps and building lights spread out below us like a carpet of stars. But the colors were all wrong. Purple streetlights lined roads that curved in patterns that made no geometric sense. Buildings glowed from the inside with sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Everything was too bright, too vivid, like looking at the world through colored glass. The convoy came to a stop at what looked like a truck depot at the edge of town. One by one, the drivers climbed out of their cabs. They were all wearing identical gray coveralls, moving with the same deliberate synchronized steps. But when they turned toward me, I saw why they moved so strangely. They didn't have faces. Where their eyes, nose, and mouth should have been was just smooth skin, pale as moonlight. But somehow they could see me perfectly. All 5 of them stood there for a moment, their blank faces turned in my direction, then gestured for me to follow them into the town. I sat in my cab with the engine idling, trying to process what I was seeing. Looking down into that valley, I could see thousands of people moving through the streets. Every single one of them walked in perfect unison. Same stride length, same arm swing, same turning motions. Like they were all connected to the same invisible puppet strings. That's when I understood what this place really was. This wasn't just some strange town hidden in the mountains. This was a collection point. Those black trucks were harvesters, driving the highways and gathering up drivers like me. People who traveled alone through remote areas, people who wouldn't be missed right away if they just disappeared. I saw children down there, little ones with the same blank faces, walking in formation with the adults. Families that had been taken, transformed into whatever these things were. The faceless drivers were gesturing more insistently now, starting to walk toward my truck. I had maybe 30 seconds to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could feel something tugging at my mind, trying to pull me out of the cab and down into that town. Part of me wanted to go, to join that synchronized march through streets lit by impossible colors. It would be peaceful, I realized. No more worries about bills or retirement or Sarah's medical treatments. Just walking forever in perfect harmony with thousands of others. But I thought about my granddaughter Emma, barely 6 years old, who was supposed to come stay with us for Christmas. I thought about Sarah waiting for me to come home so we could start our new life together. I thought about all the other drivers out there on dark highways, heading toward their own encounters with black truck convoys. I made my choice. I slammed my truck into gear and floored the accelerator straight toward what looked like a power station in the CTs. Enter of town. My Peterbilt crashed through barriers and fencing, sparks flying as I plowed through electrical equipment and transformers. The whole valley lit up white as lightning as the pool. Power grid overloaded. The last thing I remember was the explosion. When I woke up, I was sitting in my truck on the shoulder of I-77, about 50 miles south of Charleston. My CB radio was working fine, GPS was showing my normal route to Norfolk, and the sun was coming up over familiar mountains. For a minute, I thought maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw 2 faces looking back at me. My own, weathered and tired like always. And next to it, smooth and blank where features should be. That was 9 years ago, and I exist in both worlds now. The human world where I go to Emma's birthday parties and help Sarah with her garden, and the other world where faceless harvesters patrol highways looking for people to take. The thing is, when I chose to sacrifice myself to save those people, the harvesters gained something they'd never had before. Someone who understood both sides. They let me come back because I'm more useful to them alive than dead. I can move between worlds, see things they can't see, understand human behavior in ways they never could. But I made my own deal with that arrangement. Now I spend my retirement driving these mountains, watching for the signs. When I spot a convoy of black trucks or see a driver heading toward one of their collection routes, I do whatever it takes to turn them away, flash my high beams, get on the CB radio, sometimes even physically block roads if I have to. Other truckers think I'm just some crazy old coot who won't get off the highways. They don't know I'm connected to about 36 other drivers who made the same choice I did. We can sense when the harvesters are active, feel it like pressure in our skulls. We save maybe 1 or 2 people a month. Doesn't sound like much, but those are families that get to stay together, kids who grow up normal with, and husbands who don't spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to someone they love. The hardest part is staying away from my own family. Emma's 13 now, and when she looks at me, I can tell she sees both faces. It scares her, even though she doesn't understand why. So I keep my distance, watch her from the truck when she plays in the yard, make sure she's safe without getting too close. Sarah knows something changed in me that night, but I've never told her the whole truth. She thinks I had some kind of breakdown, that retirement was harder on me than expected. She worries I spend too much time alone on the road, but she doesn't try to stop me. Maybe some part of her understands that what I'm doing matters. If you're a driver reading this, trust your instincts. If you see a convoy of black trucks that doesn't feel right, find another route. If your GPS starts acting up in remote areas, turn around. If you start seeing road signs in languages that hurt to look at, get back to civilization as fast as you can. And if you ever see an old man in a beat-up Peterbilt flashing his lights at you on a dark highway, listen to what he's trying to tell you. Because the mountains are full of things that want to take you somewhere you'll never come back from. I'm still out there, driving routes I know by heart, keeping watch over roads that connect our world to places that shouldn't exist. It's not the retirement Sarah and I planned, but it's the one I chose. And every time I help someone avoid those black trucks, I remember why I made that choice in the first place. Some roads are meant to be traveled alone. This is one of them. I'm 24 years old, and honestly, I never thought I'd be telling anyone this story. My name's Tyler Brooks, and up until 8 months ago, I was managing a GameStop in Richmond. COVID hit, store closed down, and I was stuck trying to figure out what to do next. A buddy of mine who drives long haul convinced me trucking was recession-proof. Said people always need stuff moved around, no matter what's happening in the world. So I got my CDL and started driving for this mid-size company out of Virginia. Nothing fancy, mostly regional runs hauling paper products and office supplies. I'd been streaming on Twitch for a couple years as a hobby, just playing games and talking to maybe 10 or 15 people on good nights. But when I started trucking, I figured why not document the whole experience, show people what life on the road was really like. Started a new channel called Tyler Trucks 247 and began streaming from my cab whenever I had decent cell service. Most of the time it was just me talking to maybe 50 viewers about truck stop food or complaining about dispatch, but it was something to do during my mandatory rest periods. The day this happened, I was hauling a full load of copy paper and office supplies from a warehouse in Roanoke up to a distribution center in Harrisonburg. Nothing unusual about the run. I'd done similar routes maybe a dozen times before. But dispatch had me take Route 220 through Jefferson National Forest instead of staying on the interstate. Said there was construction on I-81 and this would actually be faster. I remember thinking it would make for good content, driving through all those mountains with the fall colors just starting to turn. I went live around 2 p.m., had maybe 800 people watching, which was pretty good for me back then. The scenery really was beautiful. All those rolling hills covered in trees, the road winding through valleys with little creeks running alongside. Chat was being pretty chill, asking the usual questions about truck life, how much money I made, whether I'd seen any weird stuff on the road yet. That's when someone in chat mentioned something about the mountains being hungry. I laughed it off at first, figured they were just trying to be spooky since it was getting close to Halloween. But then a few other viewers started backing them up, saying locals in that area had stories about Route 220. One guy claimed his uncle was a state trooper and wouldn't patrol that stretch alone. I thought they were just messing with me, trying to get a reaction for the stream. Around mile marker 47, that's when I first noticed something was off. I was coming around this wide curve, doing maybe 55 in a 55 zone, when I felt the truck pull to the right. Not like wind or anything. I'd driven through plenty of crosswinds and mountain drafts. This felt different, like something was physically tugging at the truck, trying to pull it toward the mountainside. At first I thought maybe I had a tire going flat or the load had shifted. But when I checked my mirrors, everything looked normal. The trailer was tracking straight, no weird lean or anything. But the pulling sensation kept getting stronger. I had to actively steer left just to stay in my lane. Chat was going crazy, asking if I was okay, saying they could see the truck tilting in the camera feed from my dash cam. I pulled over at the next wide spot, put my hazards on, and did a full walk-around inspection. Checked the tire pressure, looked at the load securement, tested the fifth wheel connection. Everything was exactly like it should be. But even parked, I could feel the truck wanting to lean toward the mountain. It was subtle, but definitely there, like the whole rig was being drawn to the hillside by some kind of invisible force. The trees were wrong, too. I should have noticed it earlier, but once I stopped and really looked, it was obvious. All the trees on the mountainside were bent toward the road, like they'd grown that way over years and years. Not from wind or anything natural. They all curved in the exact same direction, like something inside the mountain had been pulling on them for decades. My viewer count had jumped to over 2,000 by then. People were screenshotting the stream, sharing clips on other platforms. Some of the comments were getting pretty wild. People claiming this was the same area where cars had disappeared over the years, others posting links to old newspaper articles about missing persons cases along Route 220. I figured most of it was just internet nonsense, but it was definitely good for engagement. That's when my instruments started going haywire. The fuel gauge needle began spinning like a compass near a magnet. My GPS kept recalculating, showing my position jumping all over the map. The radio started picking up stations that shouldn't have been reachable from that location. AM talk radio from cities hundreds of miles away, mixed with static and what sounded like voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. The weird part was my streaming equipment kept working perfectly. Chat could see and hear everything clearly, even as every other electronic system in the truck was freaking out. People were telling me to get out of there, but honestly, the view count was climbing so fast I didn't want to stop. This was the kind of content that could really blow up my channel. I put the truck back in gear and started rolling again, figuring I'd push through whatever was causing the interference and get to clearer area. But as I drove deeper into the mountains, the road itself started changing. What had been a normal two-lane highway began curving upward at angles that didn't make sense. I'm talking about slopes that would have been impossible for a loaded semi to climb, but somehow my truck kept moving forward. Engine working harder than it should have been, but never losing power. The asphalt under my tires felt different too. Softer, like it was warming up despite the cool October air. When I looked in my mirrors, I could see the road surface rippling behind me, almost like water. At first I thought it was just heat distortion, but as I watched, the pavement actually began flowing, moving in slow waves toward the mountainside. That's when I saw the other vehicles. They were embedded in what used to be the road surface, partially dissolved into the flowing asphalt like they'd been caught in some kind of acid. I could make out the shapes of cars and trucks from different time periods. An old station wagon that looked like it was from the 70s, a pickup truck that might have been from the 50s, even what looked like the remains of a horse-drawn wagon way off to one side. The mountain was digesting them. That's the only way I can describe it. Breaking them down slowly, absorbing them into itself bit by bit. Some of the vehicles still had partial shapes, but others were just metal stains in the rock face, completely integrated into the mountain. My viewer count hit over 7,000. Chat was going absolutely insane, with people arguing about whether this was real or some kind of elaborate hoax. Some viewers were already calling local authorities, posting the stream to Reddit and Twitter. The whole thing was going viral in real time. I tried to stop, tried to put the truck in reverse, but nothing I did had any effect. The truck was being pulled forward and upward by forces I couldn't understand. My trailer started dissolving into the road surface, the paper products I'd been hauling mixing with the flowing asphalt like ingredients in some massive, slow-motion recipe. The cab started going next. I could feel the metal frame getting soft, beginning to merge with the Untained's digestive system. The steering wheel was warm under my hands, almost sticky. The seat beneath me felt like it was sinking into something deeper than the truck's floor. People in chat kept asking how I was still able to stream if everything else was failing. I realized then that the mountain wanted this broadcast to continue. It was using my signal, amplifying it somehow, making sure as many people as possible could see what was happening to me. My death was being turned into bait for the next feeding cycle. The viewer count kept climbing. Over 12,000, then 18, then 25. People were sharing the stream everywhere, calling news stations, posting about the viral truck driver who disappeared live on camera. The mountain knew that all this attention would bring investigators, reporters, rescue teams. More food delivered right to its doorstep. As the truck became part of the mountain's body, I started feeling its thoughts mixing with mine. Thousands of other victims' memories, absorbed over centuries. Native Americans who had known to avoid this place, European settlers who had built roads right through its feeding ground without understanding what they were doing. Travelers from every era, all of them becoming part of the same ancient hunger. The stream was glitching now, but somehow still broadcasting. Over 45,000 viewers watching my final moments, flooding the chat with missing person reports and emergency numbers. The mountain had learned to use human technology, turned our own connectivity against us. The last thing I remember clearly was trying to warn everyone to avoid Route 220, to stay away from mile marker 47. But even as I said it, I knew the warning would just bring more curious people, more potential victims drawn by the mystery of the vanished trucker. The stream ended, but the mountain kept my signal alive just long enough for the story to spread. Within hours, my disappearance was trending on every social media platform. News crews were already heading toward Jefferson National Forest to invest. Tygate. I'm still here, in a way. Part of the mountain now, along with everyone else it's consumed over the centuries. Sometimes I can feel my consciousness surface when it's feeding, watch through its senses as it lures in the next victim. The geological processes have gained something like intelligence over the millennia, learning to use our own tools and technology to make the hunting easier. If you're reading this somehow, if any part of my warning made it through, please listen. Don't come looking for answers. Don't try to investigate what happened to Tyler Brooks, the trucker who vanished on a live stream. That's exactly what it wants. The mountain's appetite is endless, and it's learned that the best bait is mystery itself. Route 220, mile marker 47. That's all you need to know to stay safe. Just stay away. My name's Michelle, and I'm 35 now. Back in 2013, I was driving truck for a living, which honestly wasn't something I ever thought I'd be doing. I used to be a social worker down in Louisville, spent 8 years trying to help kids who'd been dealt a bad hand. Problem was, I kept running into the same corruption over and over again. Cases getting buried, kids sent back to dangerous homes because their parents had the right connections. When I finally blew the whistle on a supervisor who was taking bribes to look the other way on abuse cases, well, let's just say my career in social work came to a real quick end. Nobody wants to hire a whistleblower, even when you're in the right. So I got my CDL and started hauling freight. At least on the road, it was just me and whatever I was carrying. No office politics, no kids I couldn't save. I'd been trucking for about a year when I got this delivery request that seemed too good to be true. Medical supplies to some religious community way out in eastern Kentucky, and they were paying nearly double the usual rate for a load that size. The dispatcher said they were real particular about their privacy, didn't like dealing with the big shipping companies, preferred independent drivers who could keep things quiet. That should have been my first red flag right there, but the money was good and I needed it. They sent me coordinates instead of a street address, which was weird but not unheard of for remote locations in the mountains. The GPS led me down roads that kept getting narrower and more winding. By the time I reached the coordinates, I was on a gravel path that barely qualified as a road. Then I saw the compound. high concrete walls topped with razor wire, like a prison. There was a heavy steel gate with a guard tower, and when I pulled up, these two men in gray clothing came out to check my paperwork. They moved in this weird, synchronized way, like they'd rehearsed every step. Both of them had that hollow look I'd seen too many times in my social work days, the look of people who'd had their spirit broken. One of them directed me to back up to a loading dock inside the compound. That's when I got my first real look at the place. All the buildings were painted the same dull gray as the clothes everyone wore. People moved between the buildings in small groups, but nobody was talking or laughing or doing anything that looked normal. Kids too, maybe 20 or 30 of them, all with that same empty expression. It reminded me of the worst group homes I'd visited, places where they'd medicated the kids into zombies. A man who introduced himself as Prophet Marcus came to oversee the unloading. He was maybe 50, tall and thin, with pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink. He kept thanking me for bringing them what they needed to prepare the vessels. I figured he was talking about communion cups or something religious like that. But when I watched them unload the truck, I realized these weren't normal medical supplies. Industrial quantities of formaldehyde, surgical tools I'd only seen in autopsy photos, chemical preservatives and embalming equipment, enough to preserve dozens of bodies. I asked Prophet Marcus what kind of medical work they were doing that needed all this stuff, and he smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. Said they were preparing their departed brothers and sisters for important work, spreading God's message across the country. That's when he took me to the warehouse. I still have nightmares about what I saw in there. Rows and rows of bodies on metal tables, all of them truckers based on the clothing. Some looked fresh, others had been there for weeks or months. But they weren't just lying there. They were sitting up, working with their hands on truck parts and equipment, and moving around like they were alive, except their eyes were completely vacant, and their skin had that waxy look you see on corpses. Prophet Marcus explained it like he was talking about the weather, said truckers were God's chosen messengers because they traveled the highways spreading the word. When a driver died while serving the community, they could be brought back to continue their sacred work. The chemicals didn't just preserve the bodies, they kept the neural pathways active enough for basic motor functions and speech. Dead truckers could still drive, could still make deliveries, could still recruit new drivers to join the cause. I watched one of them shamble past me, carrying a fuel pump. He turned and looked right at me, and I swear I could see his license hanging from his belt. Tennessee plates. This guy had been dead for months, but he was still working, still following orders. When I looked closer, I could see the injection sites on his neck where they'd pumped him full of whatever cocktail of chemicals kept him moving. Prophet Marcus must have seen the horror on my face because he started talking faster, more excited. Told me they'd been perfecting the process for 5 years. Over 200 truck drivers had joined their cause, some willingly, others after having accidents on the mountain roads. The reanimated ones were better workers than the living, he said. Never got tired, never complained, never tried to leave. And they could pass for alive long enough to make deliveries and bring back new recruits. I knew I had to get out of there, but I also knew I couldn't just drive away and pretend I'd never seen this. My social work training kicked in. I started acting interested in their beliefs while quietly gathering evidence. Took photos with my phone when nobody was looking. Recorded Prophet Marcus describing their resurrection process in detail. Found records they kept of missing drivers going back years. The worst part was learning how they picked their targets. They'd put out fake delivery requests for independent doctor. Ivers, especially ones who worked alone. Drivers would come for what seemed like easy money, then have convenient accidents on the winding mountain roads. The compound had a whole garage full of trucks belonging to drivers who'd never made it home. When I finally escaped, told them I needed to file some paperwork with my dispatcher, I went straight to the FBI. Took them 3 days to believe me, even with all the evidence I'd gathered. But when they raided the compound, they found exactly what I'd described. 47 preserved bodies, some of them still moving around performing tasks. Chemical equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Financial records showing they'd been funding the operation by using the reanimated drivers to make legitimate deliveries. The trials lasted nearly 2 years. I testified at 17 different hearings. Defense attorneys tried to claim it was all religious freedom, that the community genuinely believed they were performing resurrection miracles. But the forensic evidence was clear. They were using a combination of embalming chemicals and electrical stimulation to animate dead tissue. The bodies could follow simple commands and repeat memorized phrases, but they weren't alive in any meaningful sense. Looking back now, I still can't believe I walked out of there alive. Prophet Marcus and his inner circle got life sentences, but I know there were other compounds, other operations. The FBI asked me to consult on similar cases, and I've spent the last decade helping them investigate trafficking operations that target truckers. I still drive sometimes, but never alone, and never to addresses I can't verify. And I never, ever take delivery requests that seem too good to be true. Because I learned that in the trucking world, just like in social work, when something looks perfect on paper, there's usually something horrible hiding underneath. The thing that still keeps me up at night isn't the reanimated bodies, or even Prophet Marcus. It's thinking about all those drivers who never made it home to their families. People who just vanished because they took what seemed like an easy job. I wear a GPS tracker now, check in with my dispatcher every few hours, and I never turn off my phone. Because I know there are still people out there who see truck drivers as nothing more than raw material for their twisted plans. Some nights I wonder how many of those preserved truckers are still out there, making deliveries for operations we haven't found yet. Still following their final orders, trapped in bodies that should have been allowed to rest years ago. I was 32 when my whole life fell apart in 2009. Restaurant I'd been managing for 3 years went under during the recession, and my marriage went with it. Mike couldn't handle the stress, the bills, me working 16-hour days trying to keep everything together. By March, I was divorced, broke, and living in my sister's spare room in Louisville. That's when I saw the ad for CDL training. 6 weeks later, I had my commercial license and was hauling loads for a small outfit that specialized in supplying mountain grocery stores throughout eastern Kentucky. The pay wasn't great, but it was honest work, and I liked being alone on the road. Gave me time to think or not think, depending on what I needed that day. Most of the routes were straightforward. Interstate to county highway to some little town where the grocery store owner knew your name and offered you coffee while you unloaded. I'd been driving for about 6 months when dispatch gave me a run that changed everything. It was mid-September, and I was hauling a load of canned goods to a store in Harlan County. The usual route would have taken me up Interstate 75 and over, but there'd been a wreck that shut down traffic for hours. My dispatcher, Jerry, suggested I take Route 15 through Pine Mountain. It's a bit winding, he said, but it'll get you there faster than sitting in traffic. I'd never driven that particular stretch before, but the GPS showed it as a legitimate route, so I figured why not. I started the climb around midnight, my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. The road was narrow but well-maintained, winding back and forth up the mountainside. My truck was a 2007 Peterbilt, nothing fancy, but reliable. The engine hummed steady as we climbed, and I had classic rock playing low on the radio. Just another night haul through the Kentucky mountains. That's when I saw something that made me see off the throttle. There was a figure walking up the center line of the road, maybe a quarter mile ahead. At first, I thought it was just someone walking along the shoulder, maybe a broken-down motorist heading for help. But as I got closer, I realized this person was walking directly down the middle of the road, moving uphill at a steady pace. And they were tall, really tall. I slowed down and hit my horn a couple times. Not aggressive, just letting them know I was coming. The figure didn't react, didn't move to the side, just kept walking. As I closed the distance, I could see this wasn't a normal person. The proportions were all wrong. Had to be 12 feet tall, maybe more, with each step covering what looked like 20 feet of road. The legs were too long, and they bent backwards at the knees like a bird's legs. The arms hung way too low, swinging past where the hips should be. I dropped my speed to maybe 15 miles per hour and just followed behind, not sure what else to do. Couldn't pass on that narrow road, especially with a full load. The thing, because I'd stopped thinking of it as a person, just kept walking uphill ahead of me, never looking back. This went on for 3 hours. I know that sounds impossible, but I watched my dashboard clock the whole time. 2:15 a.m. when I first spotted it, and it was after 5 a.m. when things finally changed. The weird thing was, my fuel gauge never moved. I'd started that climb with about 3/4 of a tank, and after 3 hours of climbing in first and second gear, I should have burned through a good chunk of diesel. But the needle sat exactly where it had been. Around 5:20, we reached a plateau. The road leveled out for maybe half a mile, and that's when the tall thing stopped walking. Just came to a complete stop right in the middle of the road. Then it turned around. I'll never forget that moment. It didn't have a face. Where there should have been eyes, nose, mouth, just smooth skin the color of old concrete. But somehow, I knew it was looking at me. Could feel its attention, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Then it walked over to my truck. Each step made the ground shake a little. It moved to the driver's side and leaned down, had to fold almost in half to get its head level with my window. One long arm reached out and pointed at my truck. Then it placed its hand flat on the hood. The metal started glowing red hot where it touched. I could smell the paint burning, see the steam rising in the cool mountain air. When it pulled its hand away, there was a symbol burned deep into the metal. Looked like a combination of a tree and a spiral, with lines branching off in directions that hurt to look at directly. The tall thing straightened up and gestured politely for me to pass. Just like you'd wave someone through at a four-way stop. So I did. Put the truck in gear and drove past it, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The moment I cleared that plateau, everything changed. Suddenly, I was on the other side of the mountain, rolling downhill toward Harlan County. According to my GPS, I'd somehow covered 60 miles of mountain road, but I'd only been driving for 4 hours total. That route should have taken at least 6 hours, especially climbing in a loaded truck. When I reached the grocery store, the owner came out to check the delivery. He took one look at the symbol burned into my hood and his whole demeanor changed. Got real quiet, real respectful. "You're one of the marked drivers," he said. Wouldn't explain what that meant, just helped me unload and got me on my way fast. Over the next few months, I started noticing things. My truck ran better than it ever had. Engine problems I'd been dealing with just disappeared. Fuel economy improved so much I was spending half what I used to on diesel, and other truckers would see that symbol and treat me differently, some with respect, some with fear. None of them would tell me what it meant. But I figured it out when the anniversary came around. Same date, same time. I was driving through Kentucky again when I felt this pull, like someone was tugging on a string attached to my chest. I tried to ignore it, but my truck started acting up. Engine sputtering, electrical system going haywire. I pulled over and sat there for maybe 20 minutes, and the pull got stronger. So I drove back to Route 15 and started climbing Pine Mountain. The tall thing was waiting at the same plateau. This time, it examined my truck more thoroughly, walked all around it, running those long fingers over the metal. Then it touched the symbol on my hood, and I felt something like warmth spread through the cab. The mark glowed for a second, then faded back to that burned metal color. That's when I understood. This was a contract. The mark meant I was under the mountain's protection, but I had to earn it. Had to be what the thing considered a good driver. I learned the rules through trial and error over the years. Help other truckers when they're broke down. Drive safe and respectful through mountain communities. Don't litter. Don't speed through small towns. Don't act like the roads belong to me. Do that, and the mountain takes care of me. My truck stays running. Fuel lasts longer than it should, and I always find safe parking when I need it. Break the rules, and the mark starts to fade. I saw what happened to a driver who let his mark disappear completely. Found him walking down Route 15 one night, stumbling along in his trucker clothes. When I stopped to help, I realized his face was completely smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank skin. The mountain had taken his features and made him into something like itself. I've been honoring my contract for 15 years now. Every September, I drive back to Pine Mountain for renewal. The tall thing examines my truck, checks my record, and refreshes my mark if I've been living up to the bargain. Each year, the requirements get a little more demanding. Used to be enough to just help other drivers and drive responsibly. Now I run a whole network for truckers in trouble. Coordinate repairs, share fuel, provide emergency assistance. It's become my life's work, and I'm changing. Started noticing it about 5 years ago. My eyesight got better, especially at night. I can see mountain roads clear as day in complete darkness. Know every curve, every grade, every mile marker from memory. Sometimes I catch myself walking different, taking longer steps than I should. My joints bend in ways they didn't used to. Last year, during my renewal, the tall thing touched my forehead with one finger. Felt something shift inside my head, like a door opening to a room I didn't know was there. Now I can sense other marked drivers on the road, feel them coming from miles away. We nod when we pass each other, all of us bearing that same burned symbol. Some of those drivers have been marked for decades. Their trucks look impossible, pristine despite millions of miles, running on what seems like fumes. The drivers themselves move with that same unnatural stride I've been developing. We don't talk about what we're becoming. Don't need to. We all know. The mountain is making us into its agents, its protectors. Every year I become a little less Sarah Chen and a little more something else. Something that belongs to the ancient highways that wind through Appalachian peaks. I tried to break the contract once, about 8 years ago. Thought maybe if I avoided the mountain during renewal time, the mark would just fade and I could go back to normal trucking. Made it 3 days past the anniversary date before my truck died completely. Not just engine trouble. Everything stopped working at once. Had to walk 15 miles back to the plateau and beg forgiveness. The tall thing touched my face that night, and I felt my features start to smooth out, nose flattening, mouth sealing shut. Stopped just shoo. Bored of completing the transformation and gave me one more chance. Haven't missed a renewal since. These days, I don't fight what's happening to me. The mountain has been good to me, kept me safe, given me purpose. I help other drivers guide lost folks back to safe roads, maintain the ancient bargain that keeps traffic flowing through these peaks. But I know someday my humanity will be the final payment. I'll join the tall thing on its endless patrol of the mountain roads, and some other desperate trucker will see me walking in their headlights. Until then, I keep driving, keep helping, keep honoring my contract. The symbol on my hood glows a little brighter each year, and the mountain feels more like home. If you're ever hauling freight through eastern Kentucky and you see a truck with a strange burned mark on the hood, give a friendly wave. We're all just doing our part to keep the mountains happy. I was 28 when this happened, back in 2014. My name's Marcus Williams, and honestly, I don't talk about this much because most people think I'm lying or crazy or both. But I've got the dash cam footage to prove it, and the FBI file number if anyone wants to look it up. I'd been trucking for about 2 years at that point, ever since I lost my factory job in Detroit. Had a daughter, Emma, who was only 6 then, and I needed steady work to keep us afloat. Her mom wasn't in the picture, so it was just me and her against the world. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid decent, mostly hauling medical supplies to rural hospitals across the Midwest and South. Long hours, lonely roads, but Emma needed food and a roof over her head. I'd gotten used to the weird runs, the middle-of-the-night pickups, the places that didn't look like much from the outside, but had serious security and paperwork requirements. Medical stuff is regulated 6 ways from Sunday, so I figured that was just part of the business. This particular run started on a Sunday night, June 15th. I remember because Emma had been upset about me leaving on a weekend again. Dispatch called around 11 p.m. Emergency pickup in rural Tennessee needed to get biological samples to a hospital in Knoxville before morning. The pay was double my usual rate, which should have been my first red flag. But single dads don't turn down double pay, you know? The coordinates they gave me led to this concrete building about 40 miles outside of Cookeville, surrounded by a chain-link fence with razor wire on top. Place looked abandoned from the road. No signs, no lights, just this industrial block sitting in a field of dead grass. But my paperwork said the facility was active, and there was a refrigerated trailer already waiting for me, engine running, keeping whatever was inside cold. I remember turning on my dash cam as I pulled up to the gate. Force of habit. I recorded all my pickups in case there were ever any questions about condition or timing. The timestamp shows 3:42 a.m. when I hooked up to that trailer. The paperwork was minimal, just said biological samples, handle with extreme care, and had a delivery address at Knoxville General Hospital. Nothing unusual about that, really. I'd hauled organs, blood products, research specimens before. Medical facilities work around the clock. But something smelled wrong from the start. Even with the trailer sealed and refrigerated, there was this smell hanging in the air, like meat that had been left out too long, starting to turn. Sweet and sour at the same time, with this underlying chemical tang that made my throat burn. I mentioned it on the recording, figured maybe the cooling unit was having issues. The drive started normal enough. Empty mountain roads, no traffic, just me and the radio keeping each other company. But about an hour in, maybe around 5 a.m., I started hearing noises from the trailer. Banging, like something heavy shifting around with the turns. Then what sounded like scratching against the walls from inside. At first I figured it was just the samples settling, maybe some loose equipment knocking around. But the sounds got more frequent, more deliberate, like something was alive back there, trying to get out. I pulled over at a truck stop near Crossville to check the trailer, thinking maybe the cooling system was making weird noises or something had come loose during loading. When I opened those trailer doors, cold air poured out in a rush that made my eyes water. But what I saw inside, Jesus Christ, I still have nightmares about it. Instead of medical samples or equipment, the trailer was full of meat, just hanging slabs of it, suspended from hooks along the ceiling rails. Beef, pork, what looked like sides of venison. Well, nothing unusual about that, except these pieces were moving. Not swaying from the truck's movement, actively shifting, breathing, some of them turning to look at me when the light hit them. And they had human features twisted into them, faces embedded in what should have been beef brisket, their eyes still alive and aware, hands growing out of pork shoulders, fingers flexing and grasping at the air. A torso that was clearly human from the waist up, but dissolved into raw hamburger below the ribs. They all turned toward me when I opened those doors, every single piece of that nightmare cargo. And one of them, a face that was mostly intact, pressed into what looked like a chuck roast, opened its mouth and whispered, "Help us." I slammed those doors shut and grabbed my phone to call 911, but the call got patched through to dispatch instead. The voice that answered wasn't my usual guy. Too calm, too mechanical, like someone reading from a script. "Delivery must be completed," he said. "No deviations from route. Proceed to destination immediately." I told him I wasn't delivering that horror show to a hospital, that whatever was in my trailer wasn't medical supplies. But when I tried to unhook the trailer, I found that the kingpin had fused to my fifth wheel. The metal had grown together like living tissue, all twisted and organic looking. I couldn't separate them no matter how hard I tried. That's when the screaming started. Dozens of human voices from inside the trailer, all begging me to complete the delivery, to end their suffering. They knew where they were going, knew what was going to happen to them, and they wanted it to be over. But I wouldn't, deliver them to more people who might end up in the same state. Instead of heading to the hospital, I drove to the nearest truck stop and got on the CB radio. Started warning every driver I could reach about the medical depot, giving out the coordinates and describing what I'd seen. Within an hour, I had a convoy of 12 trucks surrounding me in that parking lot. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd had strange experiences with loads that weren't what they seemed. We organized fast. Some of the drivers blocked the access roads leading back to that concrete building, while others went to police stations in 3 different counties with our recordings and evidence. The FBI got involved within 6 hours, and it took them 3 days to identify all the victims in my trailer. Those people had been missing for months, some for over a year. Hikers, campers, folks who'd disappeared in the mountains and were presumed dead. The facility had been processing them, keeping them alive in that horrible state, turning them into livestock for God knows what purpose. We never found out who was running the operation. By the time the feds raided the place, it was empty except for some medical equipment and industrial freezers. Emma's proud of her dad for being a hero, keeps the medal they gave me on her dresser. But I still wake up some nights hearing those voices, begging me to help them. I started a truckers network after that, sharing information about suspicious loads and checking on each other. We don't transport anything blindly anymore. and we sure as hell don't take double pay without asking a lot of questions first. That dash cam footage is locked in an FBI evidence locker somewhere, but I kept copies. Sometimes I watch it to remind myself that it really happened, that I didn't imagine the whole thing. Those people were saved because we chose to fight back instead of just following orders. I'm still driving these roads, still fighting for what's right out here. But I'll never forget that smell, or the way those faces looked at me in that trailer. Some things you just can't unsee, you know? Some things change you forever. And if any of you drivers out there get a call about grid reference 447, don't take that load. Just don't. My name's Carlos Mendoza, and I'm 38 years old now. Back in 2011, I was hauling produce across the country in my 18-wheeler, trying to make ends meet for my wife, Maria, and our 3 kids. I'd come up from Mexico in '98, got my citizenship in 2005, and trucking seemed like the best way to support my family. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and I liked being on the road. What I didn't like were those long hauls through the mountains at night, especially the old tunnels carved through solid rock back in the 50s. To this day, I can't drive through a tunnel without my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I was making a run from California to some markets on the East Coast, carrying a full load of fresh vegetables and fruit. The schedule was tight, so I'd been pushing through the night to make my delivery window. Around 11:30 p.m., I was coming through West Virginia on Route 70, heading into the Appalachian Mountains. The road winds through some pretty remote country out there, and the longest tunnel on that stretch is about 2 miles of solid rock. During the day, those tunnels aren't too bad, but at night, with just your headlights cutting through all that darkness, they feel like driving into the earth's throat. I remember checking my watch as I approached the tunnel entrance. It was exactly midnight. The radio was playing some old country song, and I had the CB on in case any other drivers were coming through. The tunnel looked normal enough. Just 2 lanes with those old sodium lights running along the ceiling, though half of them seemed to be burned out. I downshifted and started the long drive through the mountain. About halfway through, maybe a mile in, my headlights started acting up. First they dimmed, then they flickered like there was a loose connection somewhere. I tapped the dashboard a few times, which sometimes helped with electrical problem. I was on that old truck. For a second, the lights came back strong. Then they died completely. I'm not ashamed to say I panicked a little. Being in complete darkness in the middle of a mountain tunnel with a full load behind you isn't something you train for. I hit the hazard lights, but those died too. The radio cut out. Even the dashboard lights went dark. I managed to coast the truck to a stop near what I hoped was the right side of the tunnel, though honestly, I couldn't see anything. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes trying to get something working. The engine was still running fine, but every electrical system in the truck had failed at once. That should have been impossible. I had no choice but to get out and check the connections under the hood, maybe see if I could spot the problem with my flashlight. When I stepped out of the cab, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. In a tunnel, you expect to hear your voice echo, maybe some dripping water, the hum of ventilation systems. But this was dead silent, except for the idle of my diesel engine. The air felt thick and wrong, like breathing through wet cloth. And it was cold, much colder than it should have been for late spring. I popped the hood and started checking connections with my flashlight. Everything looked normal. The battery terminals were clean, the alternator belt was tight, all the fuses seemed okay. I was under there for maybe 10 minutes when I heard the first sound. Scratching, like claws on stone coming from somewhere above me. I froze with my flashlight pointed at the engine block. The scratching stopped. Then it started again, but from a different spot. Higher up, along the tunnel ceiling. I pointed my flashlight up into the darkness, but the beam didn't reach far enough to show me anything useful. The scratching moved again. This time it sounded like it was coming from both sides. As of the tunnel, up near the roof, like something was moving through the rock itself. I climbed back into the cab and tried the CB radio. Sometimes those work even when other electronics don't. The radio crackled to life, and in the green glow of the display, I could see my hands were shaking. I called out on the emergency channel, but all I got back was static. That's when something heavy hit the roof of my trailer. The whole truck rocked on its suspension. Then I heard more impacts, like multiple things dropping from the ceiling onto my load. Through the back window of the cab, I could see shapes moving around on top of the trailer. In the dim light from the CB radio, they looked wrong, too pale, too long in the arms and legs. I grabbed my bigger flashlight from the sleeper and shined it back at the trailer. What I saw still gives me nightmares. 3 of them were on my truck. They looked almost human, but their skin was white as cavefish, stretched tight over bones that were too long. They were completely bald, with no eyes at all, just smooth skin where eyes should be. But they moved with purpose, like they could see better than I could. Their arms ended in hands with fingers that were way too long, tipped with claws that looked like they'd been worn down from digging through stone. One of them turned toward the cab when my flashlight hit it. It didn't have a face, just a mouth that opened too wide, showing teeth that looked more like the blade of a can opener than anything meant for chewing food. They weren't interested in me yet. They were tearing into my cargo, ripping through the tarps and wooden crates like tissue paper. But they weren't eating the vegetables. They were throwing them aside, searching for something else. Something that smelled different. That's when I realized they could smell me, the heat from my body. They knew I was in the cab. I've done construction work my whole life, and one thing you learn on job sites is how buildings and tunnels are put together. This tunnel was old, probably built when safety stands. Dards weren't what they are now, and these creatures had been digging through the solid rock around it, making their own passages. All that digging would have weakened the support structure. The creatures were starting to surround the cab now, sliding down from the trailer. I could hear them breathing, a wet, wheezing sound like air through a broken pipe. One of them pressed its face against the driver's side window, and I could see it didn't have a nose, just 2 slits above that horrible mouth. I fired up the engine and put the truck in gear, but instead of driving forward through the tunnel, I backed up until I felt the trailer hit the tunnel wall. Then I floored it. The impact knocked 2 of the creatures off the truck. I backed up again and rammed the wall harder, aiming for where I thought the main support beams would be. The whole tunnel shuddered, and I heard something crack in the rock above us. The creatures started making sounds then. Not quite screaming, more like the noise you hear when you bend metal until it breaks. They weren't used to their environment being threatened. This was their territory, carved out over decades, and suddenly it wasn't safe anymore. I kept ramming the support points, using the truck like a 40-ton sledgehammer. Chunks of concrete and rock started falling from the ceiling. The creatures panicked and retreated into holes in the tunnel walls that I hadn't even noticed before. When I was sure they were gone, I put the truck in drive and got out of there as fast as I could. The tunnel was already collapsing behind me. I could see it in my mirrors. By the time I reached the other end, half the mountain was probably coming down. I drove straight to the nearest truck stop and called the Department of Transportation. When the investigators showed up the next day, they found my truck covered in claw marks. Some of them still had tissue samples stuck in the gouges. The tunnel entrance had collapsed completely, but they managed to get some equipment in there to check the damage. What they found backed up everything I told them. The support beams had bite marks in them, not from any tool, but from something with teeth designed for gnawing through stone. They found scratch marks in the rock walls that couldn't be explained by any construction equipment. And in some of the creature tunnels that were still accessible, they found human remains. Truckers who had disappeared over the years driving through those mountains. People who just never made it to their destinations. My testimony led to a congressional hearing about safety in remote tunnel systems. The whole mountain route got shut down permanently. They built a new highway that goes around the area completely. These days, I work with the DOT helping them identify potentially dangerous tunnel systems across the country. I've become something of an expert on structural safety in remote areas. It's good work, and it helps other drivers stay safe from what might be living underneath the roads we travel. I still drive trucks sometimes, but only during the day, and never through tunnels if I can help it. Maria says I'm paranoid, but she doesn't argue when I take the long way around mountains. The kids are older now. My oldest just started college, and sometimes they ask me why I won't drive certain routes. I tell them it's because this country gave our family a chance at a better life, and now it's my job to make sure other families don't face what's still living under those mountains. There are more tunnels out there, More places where things that should have died out long ago are still feeding on anyone unlucky enough to break down in the dark. Looking back now, I know I was lucky that night. Lucky that my construction background taught me how to bring down a tunnel. Lucky that those creatures were more interested in protecting their territory than hunting me down. But mostly lucky that I made it out to warn other people about what is really living in the spaces we carved through the mountains. I don't talk about this much with other truckers. They think it sounds crazy. But every now and then, someone will mention a tunnel where their electronics failed or where they heard scratching sounds they couldn't explain. When that happens, I give them my card and tell them to call me if they ever need to talk about it. Because I know what they saw down there in the dark, and I know it's still hungry. I'm 31 now, and I haven't driven a truck in 7 years. Used to be a psychiatrist, if you can believe that. Had my own practice in Charlotte, specialized in trauma therapy. I was good at it too, maybe too good. Problem with listening to other people's pain all day is eventually you start carrying it home with you. By the time I was 29, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at my patients without feeling like I was drowning in their problems. Lost my license after what they called a psychological breakdown. Honestly, looking back now, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, even if it didn't feel that way at the time. After everything fell apart, I needed something completely different. Something where I could be alone with my thoughts for a while. Trucking seemed perfect. Just me, the road, and whatever music I could pick up on the radio. I got my CDL and started hauling freight up and down the East Coast. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent. And more importantly, it gave me the isolation I desperately needed. For about 8 months, it was exactly what I thought it would be. Long stretches of highway, truck stops every few hundred miles, other drivers who mostly kept to themselves unless the CB radio got chatty during bad weather. The night everything changed, I was hauling a load of furniture from Hickory, North Carolina up to Columbus, Ohio. It was a route I'd done maybe a dozen times before, mostly back roads and smaller highways to avoid the way stations on the interstates. I preferred driving at night anyway. Less traffic, cooler temperatures, and something about the darkness felt safer somehow. Like I could disappear into it and nobody would bother looking for me. I remember it was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed them. I just passed through some little mountain town in West Virginia. Couldn't even tell you the name of it now when I saw the convoy ahead of me. At first, it just looked like a bunch of trucks traveling together, which wasn't unusual. Sometimes drivers would form up for safety or just company on long hauls. But as I got closer, something felt wrong about the way they were moving. There must have been 20 or 30 vehicles, all different makes and models, but they were maintaining the exact same speed and distance from each other. I'm talking precise, like they were connected by invisible cables. No variation at all. In my years of driving, I'd never seen anything like it. Every driver has their own personality on the road. Some ride the brakes, others tailgate, some weave a little when they're getting tired. But these trucks were moving like they were being controlled by a single mind. I tried to pass them, but as soon as I pulled into the left lane, they all shifted over together, blocking me. Perfect coordination, no turn signals, no radio chatter that I could hear on the CB. They just moved as one unit and kept me boxed in behind them. That's when I first started hearing the voices. It started as just background noise, like distant conversation you might overhear in a diner. But as we drove deeper into the mountains, the voices got clearer. Multiple truck drivers talking all at once, overlapping conversations about fuel stops, road conditions, delivery schedules. At first I thought maybe I was picking up some kind of radio frequency bleed-through, but my CB was off. The voices were coming from inside my own head. I've got enough psychiatric training to recognize the signs of a psychotic break, and my first thought was that the stress of losing my practice had finally caught up with me. But these weren't random hallucinations. The conversations were too specific, too detailed. I could hear a woman discussing her route through Tennessee. A man complains about a dispatcher in Michigan. Another voice sharing information about a truck stop with cheap diesel near the Virginia border. Real information, real places, real problems that working drivers would have. Then the voices started including me in the conversation, not talking to me directly, but acknowledging my presence. I heard my truck's license plate number being discussed, my approximate weight and cargo description, even details about my driving history that there was no way they could know. That's when I realized I wasn't just hearing these voices. They were hearing me too. Somehow my thoughts were being shared with this group of drivers, and theirs were being shared with me. As a psychiatrist, I'd read about collective consciousness experiences, usually in cases involving severe trauma or dissociative disorders. But this felt different, more organized, more intentional. The other drivers weren't just sharing random thoughts. They were coordinating, planning, working together with a level of efficiency that no human organization could achieve. They knew about every speed trap for the next 200 miles, every construction delay, every shortcut that wasn't on any official map. They were sharing decades of combined driving experience instantaneously. For the first few minutes, it was actually wonderful. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become until I suddenly wasn't alone anymore. The constant mental chatter was like having 27 companions riding in the cab with me. Their collective knowledge made driving effortless. I knew exactly when to change lanes, which routes to take, how to maintain optimal fuel efficiency. My truck began moving in perfect formation with the others, and I wasn't even consciously steering anymore. The hive mind was driving my vehicle, and it was better at it than I'd ever been. But as we continued down Route 52 deeper into coal country, I started noticing things that made my psychiatric training kick in. The other drivers weren't just coordinating their movements, they were losing their individual personalities. Their thoughts were becoming more and more similar, their decision-making processes identical. I could feel it happening to me too, like parts of my own mind were being quietly overwritten by the collective consciousness. That's when I saw the first dead driver. The truck directly in front of me had a clear view into the cab, and I could see the silhouette of whoever was behind the wheel. But the head was tilted at an angle that wasn't quite right, and it never moved. Not once in the 40 minutes I'd been following the convoy. When we passed under a particularly bright overpass light, I got a clear look at the driver's face. The skin was gray and sunken, eyes clouded over, mouth hanging open. He'd been dead for weeks, maybe months, but his hands were still on the steering wheel and his truck was maintaining perfect formation with the rest of the convoy. I started checking the other vehicles, and the horror of what I was seeing began to sink in. Maybe half the trucks in the formation had corpses behind the wheel. Some looked recently deceased. Others were so decomposed I could see bone through rotted flesh. But they were all still driving, still responding to the collective consciousness that was controlling the convoy. The hive mind had found a way to keep using their bodies even after their individual minds had been completely absorbed. I tried to break free then, but it was like fighting against 27 other versions of myself. Every time I attempted to think independently, to plan an escape, the other minds would sense my resistance and push back. They didn't want me to leave. They'd been lonely too, isolated in their own trucks for years, and now that they'd found a way to never be alone again, they weren't going to let anyone break the connection. The mental pressure was incredible. Imagine trying to have your own thought, as while 27 other people are thinking completely different things inside your head at the same time. I could feel my individual identity starting to dissolve, my personal memories and experiences being integrated into the collective knowledge base. I was becoming just another node in their network, another source of driving expertise for the hive mind to draw from. I don't know how long I fought them. Time seemed to work differently when you're sharing consciousness with that many people. But eventually my psychiatric training gave me an advantage. I'd spent years learning how to compartmentalize traumatic experiences, how to build mental barriers between different aspects of consciousness. I started using those same techniques to hide parts of my mind from the collective, creating private spaces where I could plan without being detected. It was exhausting work, like constantly holding your breath while pretending to breathe normally. But gradually, I was able to create a small, protected area of my thoughts where the hive mind couldn't reach. I used that space to plan my escape, all while pretending to be fully integrated into their consciousness. The opportunity came when we reached a steep downhill section with a guardrail on one side and a drop-off on the other. I waited until the convoy was focused on maintaining formation through some tricky curves, then suddenly jerked my steering wheel hard to the right. My truck broke formation and crashed through the guardrail, rolling down the embankment and coming to rest in a creek bed about 50 feet below the highway. The impact severed my connection to the hive mind instantly. The sudden silence in my head was almost as shocking as the crash itself. I'd gotten so used to the constant mental chatter that being alone with my own thoughts felt like going deaf. But I was free, and more importantly, I was still alive. I woke up in a Charleston hospital 3 days later with a severe concussion and a broken collarbone. The doctors said a passing motorist had called 911 after seeing my truck go off the road. But they couldn't explain why I'd apparently swerved for no reason. There were no skid marks, no evidence of another vehicle, no mechanical failure that would account for the accident. I tried to tell them about the convoy, but of course there was no trace of 27 other trucks on the security cameras. No record of that much commercial traffic on Route 52 that night. That's why I'm here, Dr. Peterson. Why I've been taking the medication you prescribed and attending these sessions for the past 2 years. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I can still hear them calling. The collective consciousness is still out there, still growing, still adding new drivers to their network. And part of me, a part I try very hard to keep locked away, misses being connected to something larger than myself. I know how crazy this sounds. I'm a trained psychiatrist. I understand the difference between reality and delusion. But I also know what I experienced on that highway, and I know that somewhere out there, trucks are still driving in perfect formation with dead men behind the wheel. The hive mind is patient. It's been recruiting drivers for years, maybe decades, building its network one lonely trucker at a time. I haven't driven a truck since the accident. Hell, I barely drive at all anymore unless I absolutely have to. But sometimes I see convoys on the interstate, and I watch for that telltale perfect formation, that inhuman coordination that no group of individual drivers could maintain. I watch, and I remember what it felt like to never be alone, even if it meant losing everything that made me who I am. They're still out there, Dr. Peterson, growing stronger every night. And sometimes, I wonder if being free is really better than being part of something that will never abandon you, never judge you, never leave you sitting alone with nothing but your own broken thoughts for company. That's why I need to stay on the medication, because late at night, when the loneliness gets really bad, the idea of driving back out to Route 52 and finding that convoy again doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. It sounds like coming home. My name's David Santos, and I'm 35 now, though this all happened when Marie and I were just starting over. She was 32 then, and we'd both gotten laid off when our company moved everything overseas. After 15 years pushing papers in cubicles, we figured we'd try something completely different. Team trucking seemed like it could be romantic, you know? Seeing the country together, being our own bosses, making decent money. Maria always said she wanted to travel more, and I thought driving those big rigs looked pretty cool. We bought a used blue Freightliner with our severance money and got our CDLs. Looking back now, I wish we'd just stayed unemployed. The run from Nashville to Richmond should have been routine. Electronics shipment, nothing special, but the dispatcher suggested we take the mountain back roads instead of the interstate. Said it was prettier and less traffic. Maria was excited about that. She'd grown up in Ohio and never really seen the Appalachians. She had this road atlas spread across her lap, tracing the route with her finger and talking about all the scenic overlooks we'd pass. The first few hours were exactly what we'd hoped for. Rolling hills, little towns with old churches, that perfect late afternoon light filtering through the trees. Maria kept pointing out farmhouses and asking me to slow down so she could take pictures with her phone. We were making good time, maybe an hour behind schedule, when things started getting strange. It was around 10 at night, and Maria was sleeping in the bunk behind me. The road had gotten narrower, winding through thick forest with no streetlights. That's when I first saw it in my side mirror. Another blue Freightliner, exactly like ours, running parallel to us through the trees. At first I thought it was just another trucker taking a different route, maybe on a logging road or something. But the weird thing was it was keeping perfect pace with us. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down for a curve, it slowed down too. I reached back and shook Maria awake. "Hey, baby, look at this," I said, pointing to the passenger side window. She rubbed her eyes and looked out, and that's when we both saw it clearly. It wasn't just one truck anymore. There were maybe half a dozen blue Freightliners, all identical to ours, all driving through the forest like there were roads where there shouldn't be roads. And the really crazy part? We could see the drivers. They looked exactly like us. Same clothes, same positions, like we were looking at ourselves in a bunch of mirrors. "That's impossible," Maria said, but she kept staring. One of the other trucks had its window down, and the woman in the passenger seat, who looked exactly like Maria, waved at us. Maria waved back without thinking, and the other Maria waved back at exactly the same time. It was like watching a reflection, except the reflection was driving through solid forest. I tried honking the horn, just to see what would happen. All the other trucks honked at the exact same moment. Maria grabbed the CB radio and started talking, but all we heard back was her own voice, slightly delayed, saying the same words. That's when I really started getting scared. This wasn't some trick of light or tired eyes. Something was seriously wrong. By 11:30, there were dozens of our trucks. They filled the forest on both sides of the road, all driving the same direction, all keeping perfect formation. Some of the drivers looked younger. I swear one looked like me in my 20s, back when I still had all my hair. Others looked older, with gray streaks and wrinkles I don't have yet, but they were all definitely us. All the Marias had her same curly brown hair and that little scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike as a kid. All the Davids had my crooked nose and the tattoo on my left arm. "I think," Maria said, and her voice was shaking, "I think we're seeing different versions of ourselves, like from different times or different choices we made." I wanted to tell her that was crazy, but honestly, I was thinking the same thing. One of the trucks had a version of me wearing a military uniform. I was never in the army. Another had Maria in what looked like a teacher's outfit, but she'd never taught school. They were us, but they were living lives we'd never lived. That's when I realized we had a bigger problem. I pressed the gas pedal, and nothing happened. We kept moving, but not because of anything I was doing. I tried the brakes. Nothing. The steering wheel turned in my hands, but it wasn't responding to what I wanted. The truck was driving itself, following whatever route it wanted to follow. "David," Maria said, and I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. "Look at my hands." I glanced over and her fingers looked blurry, like she was slightly out of focus, the edges of her not quite solid. When I looked down at my own hands on the steering wheel, they looked the same way, fuzzy around the edges, like we were becoming less real. The forest around us was getting thicker, and the other trucks were getting closer. I could see into their cabs now, could see the other versions of us talking to each other, pointing at us, some of them looking scared just like we were. A few looked calm, like they'd been through this before. One version of Maria was writing in what looked like a journal, and when she held it up to her window, I could see her handwriting even though it was in a truck 50 yards away through solid trees. "We need to get out," I said, and tried opening my door. It wouldn't budge. The handle moved, but the door stayed shut like it was welded closed. Maria tried her side too, same thing. The windows wouldn't roll down either. We were trapped in a truck that was driving itself, surrounded by dozens of other versions of ourselves, all trapped in their own trucks. By the second day, and yeah, somehow we knew it was the second day even though the sun never seemed to move, things got worse. The truck's dashboard lights started pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The seat beneath me felt warm, like skin. When Maria put her hand on the CB radio, she said she could hear voices, hundreds of them, all talking at once in languages she didn't recognize. "I remember things," she told me, and her voice sounded different, like it was coming from farther away. "I remember being a nurse in Pennsylvania, but I was never a nurse, David. I was never in Pennsylvania." I knew what she meant. I was remembering things too. Being a soldier in Iraq, though I'd never enlisted. Working construction in Montana, though I'd never been west of Tennessee. It was like we were collecting memories from all those other versions of ourselves driving through the forest around us. The strangest part was that it didn't feel wrong anymore. My hands had grown into the steering wheel, literally grown into it, like the plastic, and my skin were becoming the same thing. Maria's feet had merged with the floorboards. The dashboard lights weren't just pulsing with my heartbeat. They were my heartbeat. The engine's rumble was coming from inside my chest. On the third day, we understood. The road was lonely. It had been carrying traffic for decades, maybe centuries, but it had never had drivers who truly loved each other. It needed that. It needed hearts that could guide other people safely through the mountains. We stopped being David and Maria Santos and started being something else, something bigger. We became the road itself, every mile of asphalt and gravel, every curve and hill. We could feel other drivers when they traveled our route, their fears when the fog rolled in, their relief when they saw our headlights, in their mirrors during breakdowns, their gratitude when they found the gas station that appeared just when they needed it most. Sometimes truckers report seeing a blue Freightliner on the mountain roads between Nashville and Richmond. Always appears when they need help, when their rig breaks down, when they're lost, when the weather turns dangerous. The couple inside waves and smiles, looks perfectly happy. The truck guides them to safety, then disappears around a curve that shouldn't be there. That's us. We're still driving together, still exploring the country as a team, just not the way we expected when we bought that Freightliner with our severance money. We've become the romance of the road itself, every sunset view, every mountain vista, every mile of freedom that calls people to drive these endless highways. And honestly, after 3 years of cubicles and performance reviews and corporate downsizing, being the spirit of the open road isn't the worst thing that could have happened to us. We're together, we're helping people, and we get to see the most beautiful country in the world every single day. Just don't take the mountain back roads between Nashville and Richmond if you're not prepared to stay forever. The road might decide it likes you too. My name's Betty, and I'm 64 years old now. Been working the night shift at Mountain View Truck Stop for 20 years, out here on Route 19, where it cuts through the West Virginia mountains. You see a lot in this job. Drivers coming through at all hours, some friendly, some not so much. All of them tired and looking for coffee and a place to rest. After 2 decades of pouring coffee and taking orders, I thought I'd seen everything the highway could throw at me. I was wrong about that. It was late October 2019, and we'd been having one of those cold snaps that makes the mountains feel even more isolated than usual. The kind of weather that keeps most people inside, but truckers don't get that luxury. They've got schedules to keep, loads to deliver, and bills to pay. That's how I met Elena Rodriguez. She rolled in around midnight that Thursday, driving a red Peterbilt that looked like she kept it in showroom condition. Elena was maybe 26, small, but carried herself like she could handle whatever came her way. Had that straight-backed posture you see in military folks, even when they're trying to blend in. She ordered black coffee and a burger, sat at the counter instead of a booth, and kept glancing out the window toward the fuel pumps where her truck was parked. "You okay, honey?" I asked, setting down her coffee. Most drivers are chatty. It's part of the job for them, talking to people when they get the chance. But Elena seemed different, more watchful. She took a sip of coffee and looked at me with these serious brown eyes. "You ever have someone following you, but you can't quite prove it?" I'd heard stranger things working nights at a truck stop, so I just waited for her to continue. Elena told me she'd been seeing the same truck for 3 days straight, a black Kenworth with tinted windows. Nothing unusual about that necessarily. Truckers often end up running set Mylar routes, especially the long-haul guys. But this one was different. "Stays just out of CB radio range," she said, cutting into her burger. "Far enough back that I can't get a good look at the driver, but close enough that I know it's there. When I stop, it stops. When I take a detour, it follows. 3 days now, same routine." Elena had been Army, she told me. Served as a medic for 6 years before getting into trucking. Said she'd developed good instincts about when something wasn't right, and every one of those instincts was telling her she was being hunted. "Feels like back in Afghanistan," she said quietly, stirring sugar into her coffee. That feeling you get right before an ambush, like someone's watching, waiting for the right moment. I believed her. You don't work nights in a place like this without learning to read people, and Elena Rodriguez wasn't the type to imagine things. She finished her meal, paid her bill, and headed back out to her truck around 2 a.m. I watched through the window as she did a complete walk-around inspection, checking every tire, every strap, every light. Military habits, I figured. As she pulled out of the parking lot and back onto Route 19, I saw it. A black Kenworth, no company markings that I could see, following about a quarter-mile behind, just like she'd said. I watched their taillights disappear into the mountain darkness and said a little prayer. Something about that black truck didn't sit right with me either. Elena came back the next morning, but she looked different. Her truck was beat to hell. Deep gouges in the metal along the sides, like something with claws had tried to tear it open. The windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks, and there were dents in the hood that looked almost like handprints, if handprints could be that big. Elena herself looked like she'd been through a war zone. Her uniform was torn, she had scratches on her arms. And there was this look in her eyes I'd seen before in veterans who'd been in bad situations. She sat at the same spot at the counter and ordered the same black coffee, but her hands were shaking when she picked up the cup. "It's not human," she said, not looking at me. "Whatever's driving that truck, it's not human." I poured myself a coffee and sat down across from her. The morning shift wouldn't be in for another hour, and we were the only ones in the place. "What happened out there?" Elena told me the black truck had followed her up into the mountain passes, staying close now, not bothering to hide anymore. She'd tried to outrun it on the twisting roads, but that Kenworth kept pace no matter how fast she pushed her Peterbilt. Finally, she'd pulled over at an overlook, grabbed the combat knife she still carried from her army days, and gotten out to confront whatever was hunting her. The thing that stepped out of the black truck wasn't right. It was tall, she guessed maybe 8 feet, and thin as a rail, wearing an old trucker's cap that looked like it hadn't been new since the 1970s. But where its face should have been, there was just smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank flesh that somehow seemed to see everything. "Long arms," Elena said, rubbing at the scratches on her forearms. "Impossibly long, like they could stretch out and grab you from 20 feet away. And when it moved, it didn't walk right. More like it was floating an inch off the ground." The thing had tried to grab her, but Elena's military training kicked in. She'd fought back with everything she had, managing to cut the creature with her knife. It bled black liquid that smelled like motor oil and screamed like metal tearing. Eventually, it retreated back to its truck and disappeared into the darkness. But Elena knew it wasn't over. "Someone has to stop this thing," she told me, finishing her coffee. "I've been asking around, talking to other drivers on the CB. This has been going on for years. Drivers going missing on this route, their trucks found abandoned or never found at all. And everyone who's seen that black Kenworth describes the same thing. Tall figure, no face, staying just out of range until it's ready to strike." Elena spent the next 3 weeks at my truck stop, using it as a base while she researched and prepared. She'd park her truck out back and take one of our company vehicles up into the mountains, scouting locations, talking to locals, piecing together the pattern. What she found made her even more determined to end it. The shadow hauler, as some of the old-timers called it, had been taking drivers for decades. There were stories going back to the 1960s about the black truck and its faceless driver. It would follow someone for days, learning their route, their habits, their weaknesses, then strike when they were most isolated. Some drivers were found weeks later, their trucks discovered in impossible locations, the drivers themselves gone without a trace. Others just vanished completely. Elena's military discipline took over. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was a mission. She gathered weapons, studied topographical maps, and tracked the creature's hunting pattern. She figured out where it was likely to strike next, based on years of disappearances and sightings. 3 weeks after that first encounter, Elena borrowed my old Jeep and headed up into the deep mountains, following logging roads that hadn't seen regular traffic in years. She'd found what she thought was the thing's lair, an abandoned truck stop from the 1970s, hidden in a valley where the old highway used to run before they built the interstate. When she got there, she found 37 trucks parked in neat rows behind the crumbling building, all of them covered in dust and rust, all of them belonging to drivers who'd vanished over the years. The black Kenworth was there too, parked right in front, like it was waiting for her. Elena didn't try to sneak around or run away. She walked right up to the front door of that abandoned truck stop, kicked it open, and started the fight she'd been preparing for. The shadow hauler was inside, and it was ready for her too. The battle lasted 3 hours. Elena used every combat skill the Army had taught her, plus a few tricks she'd learned on her own. She'd brought flares and gasoline, knowing that fire was one of the few things that seemed to hurt the creature. When it came at her with those impossibly long arms, she was ready with her knife and a military-grade flashlight that could blind whatever passed for its vision. The thing screamed and fought, but Elena had the advantage of preparation and training. She managed to drive it back into one of the abandoned trucks, then set the whole thing on fire with gasoline and road flares. The creature's screams turned into something like a diesel engine dying, metal grinding against metal, until it finally went quiet. Elena limped back to my truck stop just after dawn, covered in that black blood and smelling like smoke. Her clothes were torn, she had new scratches and bruises, but her eyes looked clear for the first time since I'd met her. "It's over," she said, sitting down at the counter. "No more truckers going missing on this route." The state police found the burned-out truck stop a few days later, after Elena called in an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. They counted 37 abandoned trucks, all matching vehicles that had been reported stolen or missing over the past 40 years. The remains they found in the burned truck couldn't be identified, but the missing persons cases started getting closed. Elena became something of a legend among truckers after that. Word got around on the CB radio about the Army medic who'd fought back against the highway predator and won. Drivers started feeling safer on Route 19, knowing that whatever had been hunting them was gone. But Elena didn't stop there. She still drives these mountain roads, still works the routes through West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. Only now, she's the one doing the hunting. Other supernatural things, and there are others out there, have learned to fear the small woman in the red Peterbilt. She's made it her mission to keep the highways safe for the drivers who can't fight back. I still see her sometimes when she comes through for coffee and to check in. She looks peaceful now, like she's found her purpose. The scratches healed, the truck got repaired, but Elena Rodriguez became something different that night. She became the guardian of these mountain roads. And to this day, whenever I see a trucker looking nervous or talking about being followed, I tell them about Elena. Sometimes the best way to stop a monster is to find someone willing to be a bigger monster. Elena Rodriguez proved that sometimes the person being hunted decides to turn around and do some hunting of their own.